Please pray with me. In the words of my mouth, in the meditations of our hearts, and in the actions of our lives, may your word be proclaimed in Jesus' name. Amen. Can you imagine asking that question? That's a ridiculous question. Whose wife will she be? Like they've conjured up this crazy thing. Let's set the context a little more, right? Jesus has entered Jerusalem. We celebrate that on Palm Sunday, right? The crowds have cheered Jesus with palm branches. They're seeing a new kind of king. Shouting Hosanna. He's cleared the temple. He's kicked out the money changers, saying, my Father's house is a house of prayer, and you've made it a den of thieves, screaming, right? And now he's returned to the temple the next day to pray and to teach. And in that skittishness, all the temple authority eyes are on him. They're nervous. What's he going to say? You see, he's upset the political and the economic apple cart of the temple. He's overturned the status quo. He's not only challenged the temple authorities' theology, he's threatened their political and economic alliance with Rome. And in the doing, he's become very popular amongst the people. But Jesus of Nazareth is now a dangerous threat to the powers that be. In this mix of stuff are the theological battles between three groups of temple authorities. The scribes. The scribes, well, they're the ones who have been charged with the responsibility of writing, recording, manufacturing, restoring the scrolls that were read from. So the scriptures were written on scrolls. The scribes did that. The Pharisees, they were responsible for taking the purity of temple worship into the towns and villages in the countrysides, in the regions. And the Sadducees, well, those two, the scribes and the Pharisees, actually were they were cottoning on to this idea of resurrection. They followed or preached out of not only the law, the 5 books of Moses, but they also preached out of the wisdom literature and the prophets. The most conservative of all of the temple authorities were the Sadducees. They only believed that the scriptures that had any worth or merit was the law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Torah, called the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, attributed to Moses, called the Torah. That sounds kind of familiar. Ever heard that before? Anything like that in our day? Where there's kind of theological battles? Well, that's going on. That's why in the answer, the reason I asked Shauna to read that last sentence was the Sadducees asked the questions, but who liked the answer? The scribes. Good answer, they say, right? So there's the theological battle going on between those temple authorities. You see, in the law, in the books of Moses, there is no reference to resurrection. So, and at the time his own theology was forming around the idea of resurrection. It was an emerging idea coming out of the wisdom and the prophets. And it was just kind of an emerging idea. So Jesus is kind of playing with what resurrection might actually mean. The scribes and the Pharisees were kind of warm to that idea. The Sadducees didn't believe in it at all. But all 3 groups are testing Jesus because of what he did the day before by cleansing the temple. So all 3 groups are testing him. This is, I think, one of the most bizarre questions in all of the Christian scriptures. The Sadducees set up a ridiculous situation. There is a woman who dies. There's a woman who marries. She marries the oldest son in a family of 7 boys. The brother dies and she has no children with that brother. So she marries the second brother. You see, in Jewish law, when a woman marries a man, and should he die and there's no children, she actually becomes the chattel property of the next brother. And if she and the next brother have a son, that son is raised as the son of the guy who died. That's Jewish law. It made sense because widows who didn't belong to anybody were the poorest of the poor. So the Sadducees set it up that there's 7 brothers, there's no children, and finally she dies. In the resurrection, you can just hear the scorn and this biting commentary. Which brother will she actually be married to? As if the social constructs of first century Jewish life applied to the energetic and mystic sense of the resurrection, as if those things even looked like each other. It will be good news to not just a few of us who have had to leave first marriages, to learn that Jesus recognized the trap, treats the question with respect, and offers his first thoughts about the resurrection. So think about when you're playing with an idea for the first time. You kind of scratch your head. And sometimes I say, I'm not sure about this, but let me think out loud. And as it's coming out of my mouth, I'm not sure if that's right, but maybe, right? So I'm imagining that's what Jesus is doing. He's kind of going, what has he done? Shown respect to that stupid question. This is actually a question about the resurrection, and they don't care about it at all. They're trying to trap him, and he knows it, but he's actually being respectful. He's going, let me test this. Let me try this. Those who are considered worthy of a place in that age, the age of the resurrection, I don't think they marry or are given in marriage. That's a human construct. In fact, now let me think this. They cannot die anymore because, well, maybe they're like angels. Or maybe they're like children of God and children of the resurrection. So maybe can you hear him thinking this through out loud? And not really landing, but testing that idea. In this place where all eyes are on him. What he's attempting to do is use the mystical language of his tradition to formulate an understanding of a new idea. And what he does is he quotes the same Torah that the Sadducees have quoted. They're testing him on his biblical literacy is what they're doing. And he quotes it right back. Right? The idea of resurrection wasn't found in the law, but what he does is he says, well, if God said at the burning bush, God is the God of Moses, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then they must be living. And so he's thinking it, he's kind of like going on a mind game, but he's kind of wrapped his head around it using the Hebrew scriptures, using the law. It's not his final word. Let's not land on this as his final word about the resurrection. It may have only been, as I said, only his first thinking. But here we are, 2,100 years later, 2,000 years later, with the notion of resurrection. The idea that death is not God's final word, the idea that from death comes new life. There's a biblical notion, the refining fires. The refining fires of impossible human situations transform us into glistening gold. The belief that when we die, we return to the origin of life, resurrection. We have it. It's in front of us, and this is the one thing that the Christian tradition brings to the table conversation of faith. It is central to what we believe and experience as followers of the risen Christ. It is the central message of the gospel we have been called to proclaim from this place and from our new place here in Lynn Valley. It's true about our own death when we leave this world as we've known it. It's equally true and equally relevant when we face the worst of human experience. Huge, catastrophic events feel like death to those in them. Residential schools, slavery, the Holocaust, Rwanda, 9/11, Afghanistan, or those events closer to home, like the horrifying reality of being the parents of a beautiful 13-year-old girl living in Abbotsford, stabbed to death in the hallway of her school. Facing that unspeakable grief, those parents must feel like they've died. Yeah? Resurrection is the assertion that our death, or those events that feel like death, is not God's final answer. We will not be left in the tomb. But the idea of resurrection also asserts the only way to get to resurrection is Good Friday. The only way through this death, our own or any situation that feels like death, is to go through it. We will only shine like gold if we have been seared in the refining fires. And I dare say, for most of us, death, loss, the worst thing that could possibly happen is the thing that frightens us most. What does my death mean to me? What does my dying mean to me? Those were the two questions that Vicki Lanny asked me in 15 minutes of a program that I was to be part of in leadership. Vicki Lanny was the director of hospice services at the Peoria, Illinois Medical Center. She was presenting. She was a student of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was presenting to learners of pastoral care. I was the coordinator of the program. What does your death mean to you? She asked. What does dying mean to you? In the first 15 minutes, she didn't know. She couldn't have possibly known that at that moment, I could still remember what it was like to be 5, clutching my father, screaming, I don't want to die. 5. That was the first panic attack. I can see it today. She wouldn't have known that at 12, I would fake going up to see my parents out of my bedroom because I had freaked out in my bedroom, and by the time I got to the stairs, I'd calm down, and they would ask, why are you up? And I would fake something. I was freaking out. She wouldn't have known that the last panic attack I had, Jordan was 6 years old in his bedroom, and I was pacing up and down the hallway, freaking out. I don't want to die. I am so afraid. She couldn't have known that. And there I was, in leadership, all eyes on the leaders, and I'm facing my lifetime issue. We went through the program. It happened. It was on the Healing Touch table, where we learn to offer the technique that we offer to people who are in transition. Transition from a new job to an old job to a new job, from a marriage separation to living single, from life to death. It's often offered to those who are dying. We were in triads. Each of us had to be on the table. I had to imagine I was in the place of my death and have that offered to me. Can you imagine what it might be like to be strapped to a table? Strapped to a table and not be able to move. And what happened was exactly the opposite. The experience of facing my death, going through that, actually changed. I got off the table and I said, well, if that's what it means to die, I can do that. The only way through it is through it. And God promises that in the horrifying moments of our life, through it is resurrection. And that's what we are called as a human Christian community to proclaim as the central message. So you want to hear about the stories of Jesus? This is the big one. May we be not afraid. May we trust that we are held by a grace that is far beyond all of us. May we know that beyond whatever we're frightened is life, new life. May that be so. In Jesus' name. Amen. Please pray with me. Holy God, you have promised that in life and in death, in life beyond death, we are not alone. We give you thanks that this is the word we get to share with the world. May it live in us freely, that we might be free to tell it.